I've been married to Neil, 38M, for 9 years, and we have 2 children together, Ethan, 7, and Lily, 4. We met in college during our senior year. I was studying psychology, and Neil was majoring in business. We hit it off immediately at a mutual friend's party and started dating soon after. After graduation, we both landed jobs in the same city and moved in together. 2 years later, Neil proposed during a romantic weekend getaway to the mountains, and we got married in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. Our relationship has always been solid, built on trust, open communication, and shared values. We've weathered our fair share of challenges, from financial struggles early in our marriage to the stress of becoming new parents. Through it all, we've always been a team, supporting each other and working through our problems together. Neil works in pharmaceutical sales, a job he's had for the past 6 years. He's ambitious and hardworking, often putting in long hours to meet his targets. His dedication has paid off, as he's been promoted twice since joining the company. I'm proud of his success, but sometimes I worry that his work-life balance is off. I work part-time as a school counselor, which allows me to be more present for our kids. Neil's job requires him to travel occasionally for conferences, training sessions, or important client meetings. These trips usually last 3 to 5 days and happen every couple of months. It's never been an issue before. Neil always calls every night to check in, and we text throughout the day. I've always trusted him completely during these trips. Last month, Neil had a week-long business trip to Chicago for an important industry conference. He was excited about the networking opportunities and the chance to learn about new developments in the field. I helped him pack, making sure he had everything he needed, including the tie I gave him for our last anniversary. I told him it was his lucky charm. The first 2 days of the trip went as usual. Neil called in the evenings, sounding tired but enthusiastic about the conference. He told me about the interesting presentations he'd attended and the people he'd met. We talked about the kids, and he asked about my day. Everything seemed normal. On the 3rd day, things changed. Neil's calls became sporadic and brief. When we did talk, he seemed distracted and eager to end the conversation quickly. I tried not to read too much into it, assuming he was just busy with conference activities and possibly entertaining clients in the evenings. It was during one of these short calls, late in the evening of the 3rd day, that Neil dropped the bombshell. He sounded tired and a bit nervous as he casually mentioned that there had been a mix-up with the hotel bookings. Due to a large convention in town, the hotel was overbooked, and the company had to double up some employees in rooms. Neil had been paired with a coworker named Natalie, 29F. I was stunned into silence for a moment. When I found my voice, I asked him to repeat what he'd said, sure that I must have misheard. But no, he confirmed it again. He was sharing a room with a female coworker named Natalie. He quickly added that it was just a professional arrangement, that there were 2 separate beds in the room, and that it was only for the remaining 3 nights of the trip. My mind was reeling. I felt the knot forming in my stomach as I tried to process this information. I asked why he hadn't told me about this immediately when it happened. His response was that he didn't think it was a big deal and didn't want to worry me unnecessarily. He said it so casually, as if sharing a room with a female coworker was the most normal thing in the world. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked him how he would feel if the situation was reversed, if I had to share a room with a male coworker on a business trip. Neil seemed taken aback by my question. He paused for a moment before saying that he trusted me completely, so he wouldn't have a problem with it. His response didn't sit well with me. It wasn't just about trust, it was about respect for our marriage and maintaining appropriate boundaries with coworkers. I told him this, my voice shaking slightly with emotion. Neil sighed and said I was overreacting. He assured me again that it was just a professional situation and that I had nothing to worry about. We ended the call shortly after, with Neil promising to call me the next day. As soon as I hung up, the tears I had been holding back started flowing. I felt a mix of emotions: hurt, anger, confusion, and fear. I've never been the jealous type, but this situation felt different. It wasn't just about the possibility of infidelity, it was about the lack of consideration for my feelings and the casual disregard for what I considered to be appropriate boundaries in a marriage. I barely slept that night. My mind kept conjuring up images of Neil and this unknown woman Natalie in a hotel room together. I tried to remind myself of our strong relationship, of Neil's usual thoughtfulness and devotion. But then I'd remember how dismissive he'd been of my concerns, and the worry would creep back in. The next few days were a blur. Neil's calls remained brief and infrequent. When we did talk, he seemed eager to end the conversations quickly. He didn't bring up the room-sharing situation again, and I was too hurt and confused to broach the subject. I threw myself into taking care of the kids and work, trying to keep my mind occupied. When Neil returned home, I expected him to address the situation immediately. Instead, he acted as if nothing had happened. He unpacked, played with the kids, and went about his usual routine. He was affectionate towards me, but there was no mention of Natalie or the room sharing incident. I've been trying to process my feelings for the past week. On one hand, I want to believe Neil when he says nothing happened. We've never had trust issues before, and he's always been a devoted husband and father. I think about all the good times we've had together, our romantic dates, family vacations, the way he supported me through my postpartum depression after Lily was born. Neil has always been my rock, my partner in everything. On the other hand, I can't shake the feeling that something's not right. The fact that he didn't tell me about the room sharing arrangement immediately, his dismissive attitude towards my concerns, and his reluctance to discuss it since returning home are all red flags to me. I keep thinking about the early days of our relationship, how open and honest we were with each other. When did that change? And why? I've tried to talk to Neil about it a few times since he's been back, but he keeps brushing it off. He says I'm overreacting and that it was just a work situation. He's even suggested that my reaction is a sign that I don't trust him, which feels manipulative to me. It's as if he's trying to turn this around and make me the problem. I'm at a loss. Am I overreacting? Should I be more understanding of the situation? Or are my concerns valid? I don't want to accuse Neil of anything, but I also don't want to be naive. I keep thinking about our children and how this could affect them if there's more to the story than Neil is telling me. I've considered talking to my sister about this, but I'm hesitant to involve family just yet. I don't want to damage their relationship with Neil if this all turns out to be a misunderstanding. I've also thought about reaching out to some of Neil's co-workers to get more information, but that feels like a betrayal of trust. How do I address this with Neil in a way that he'll take seriously? How do I get him to understand that even if nothing happened, his handling of the situation has hurt me deeply? And how do I move past this and rebuild the trust in our relationship? I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and I'm not sure which way to turn. Update 1, it's been 2 weeks since my last post, and I wanted to update you all on the situation with Neil. First, I want to thank everyone for their advice and support. Your comments gave me the courage to confront Neil more directly about the hotel room incident. A few days after my original post, I decided it was time to have a serious conversation with Neil. I waited until after we had put Ethan and Lily to bed. As I was tucking Lily in, she asked why Daddy and I weren't laughing as much lately. Her innocent observation hit me hard, making me realize how much our tension was affecting the kids. Once the house was quiet, I sat Neil down in the living room. The same living room where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies, playing board games with the kids, and sharing our dreams for the future. Now it felt like a battleground. I told Neil that I couldn't move past what happened in Chicago and that we needed to have an honest conversation about it. At first, he tried to brush it off again, saying we'd already discussed it and there was nothing more to say. But I stood my ground this time. I explained how his actions had hurt me, not just the room sharing itself, but his failure to inform me immediately and his dismissive attitude towards my feelings. I told him that trust is not just about fidelity, but also about respect and consideration for your partner's feelings. I reminded him of a promise we made to each other on our wedding day, to always be honest, even when it's difficult. I asked him if he remembered the time early in our marriage when I had to work late with a male colleague on a school project. I had called Neil immediately to let him know, even though it was a completely innocent situation. I did it out of respect for him and our marriage. I asked him why he couldn't extend the same courtesy to me. After some back and forth, Neil finally opened up. He admitted that he knew I would be upset about the room sharing arrangement, which is why he didn't tell me right away. He said he was afraid of causing conflict and ruining his focus during an important business trip. He also confessed that Natalie is a new employee he's been mentoring, and he didn't want to make things awkward at work by refusing to share a room. While I appreciated his honesty, his explanation didn't sit well with me. I pointed out that by trying to avoid conflict, he had created an even bigger problem. I also expressed my discomfort with his mentorship of Natalie, given the circumstances. I asked him how long he had been mentoring her and why he had never mentioned this before. Neil looked uncomfortable as he explained that he'd been assigned as Natalie's mentor about 3 months ago when she joined the company. He said he hadn't mentioned it because it didn't seem important, it was just part of his job. But now I couldn't help wondering if there was more to their relationship than he was letting on. I asked Neil how he would feel if I was mentoring a younger male colleague and then ended up sharing a hotel room with him on a business trip. He was quiet for a long moment before admitting that he wouldn't be comfortable with that situation. It was the first time he truly seemed to understand my perspective. Neil apologized and promised to be more transparent in the future. He offered to let me meet Natalie and to keep me more informed about his work relationships. He also suggested we attend couples counseling to work on our communication. I'm glad we had this conversation, but I'm still struggling. On one hand, I want to believe Neil and move forward. I think about our history together, how he stood by me when I lost my job a few years ago, how he's always been an involved and loving father to our children. I remember the Neil who surprised me with breakfast in bed on my 30th birthday, the one who held my hand through 2 difficult pregnancies. On the other hand, I can't shake the feeling that there's more to the story. The fact that he's been mentoring Natalie for months without ever mentioning her name adds another layer of complexity to the situation. I find myself wondering what else he might not be telling me. I've decided to take some time for myself to process everything. I called my sister, Claire, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. Claire has always been my confidant, and I felt I needed her support now more than ever. Neil was upset about this decision, but I explained that I need space to think. During this time apart, I've been reflecting on our relationship and my own needs. I realized that I've often prioritized Neil's comfort over my own feelings, and that needs to change. I've always been the one to smooth things over when we disagree, to make excuses for his behavior to friends and family. I'm starting to see that this pattern isn't healthy for either of us. I'm also considering reaching out to Natalie directly, although I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Part of me wants to hear her side of the story, to see if it matches up with what Neil has told me. But another part worries that contacting her might escalate the situation or make things awkward for Neil at work. Claire has been a great support during this time. She's listened without judgment and has encouraged me to prioritize my own well-being. She reminded me of how strong and capable I am, something I think I've lost sight of over the years. I'm torn about what to do next. Part of me wants to work things out with Neil for the sake of our family. I think about Ethan and Lily, how confused and upset they would be if their parents separated. I remember the promise we made to each other and to them to always be a family. Another part feels like this incident has revealed deeper issues in our relationship that may be hard to overcome. The lack of communication, the dismissal of my feelings, the secrets, are these things we can really fix? I'd appreciate any advice on how to proceed. Should I give Neil another chance? Is couples counseling a good idea? And what about Natalie? Should I try to talk to her? I'm trying to stay strong, but this situation has really shaken my confidence in our marriage. As I sit in my sister's guest room, looking at a family photo on my phone, Neil and me with Ethan and Lily at the beach last summer, all smiles and sunburned noses, I wonder if we can ever get back to that place of happiness and trust. I hope we can, for all our sakes, but I'm no longer sure. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone again for their support and advice. Your comments have been a lifeline during this difficult time. After my stay at my sister's, I returned home to have another conversation with Neil. The house felt different somehow. The family photos on the walls that once brought me joy now seemed to mock me with their images of happier times. I found Neil in his home office, the same room where he'd often worked late into the night to provide for our family. Now it felt like a symbol of the distance between us. I told him that while I appreciated his apology, I needed more than just words to rebuild trust. I asked for full transparency about his relationship with Natalie and any future work trips. Neil agreed, albeit reluctantly. He showed me all his communications with Natalie, emails, text messages, and even their chat history on the company's internal messaging system. Most of the messages were work-related, discussing projects and schedules. But there were a few exchanges that made me uncomfortable. Nothing explicitly inappropriate, but there was a friendliness and familiarity in their tone that kept my suspicions alive. I saw messages where they discussed shared interests in music and books, inside jokes from the office, and even some mild flirting disguised as workplace banter. Reading these messages brought back memories of the early days of my relationship with Neil. We used to send each other silly jokes and song lyrics throughout the day, always eager to make each other smile. Seeing him engage in similar behavior with Natalie felt like a punch to the gut. I also decided to take up Neil's offer to meet Natalie. We had lunch together at a cafe near Neil's office, with Neil present. As we sat there, I couldn't help but notice how Natalie's eyes lit up when she talked about work projects she and Neil had collaborated on. She seemed nice enough, polite, professional, and clearly intelligent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. She was overly complimentary about Neil's mentorship, which didn't help my unease. Throughout the lunch, I found myself scrutinizing every interaction between Neil and Natalie. The way they finished each other's sentences when discussing work, the easy laughter they shared over inside jokes, it all felt too comfortable, too intimate. After the lunch, on the drive home, I expressed my concerns to Neil. The car, which had been the site of so many happy family road trips, now felt claustrophobic. I told him that while I didn't want to control his work relationships, I felt uncomfortable with the level of friendliness between him and Natalie. I asked if he would consider distancing himself from her professionally. This led to a heated argument. Neil accused me of being controlling and said I was jeopardizing his career with my insecurities. He pointed out that mentoring Natalie was part of his job responsibilities and that distancing himself from her could harm his professional reputation. He refused to change his working relationship with Natalie and said I needed to trust him or our marriage wouldn't work. His reaction shocked me. It was so different from the apologetic attitude he had earlier. It made me wonder if there was indeed more to the story than he had let on. The Neil I knew would have been more understanding of my feelings, more willing to find a compromise. This defensive, almost aggressive Neil was someone I didn't recognize. In the heat of the moment, I made a decision I'm not proud of. While Neil was in the shower that evening, I checked his phone. I know it was wrong, a violation of his privacy, but I felt desperate for the truth. What I found left me cold. There were deleted text messages between Neil and Natalie, recovered through a backup. While not explicitly romantic, they were far more personal and flirtatious than what Neil had shown me earlier. They discussed their shared hotel room experience, with comments about how nice it was to have someone to talk to at the end of long conference days. There were inside jokes I didn't understand and references to moments they had shared that Neil had never mentioned to me. The tone was friendly and playful, bordering on flirtatious at times. One message from Natalie particularly stood out: "Miss our late-night chats already. The office feels so dull in comparison." Neil's reply was equally concerning: "Same here. Maybe we need another conference soon." Confronted with this evidence, I couldn't hold back anymore. When Neil came out of the shower, I confronted him with what I had found. At first, he was angry about me invading his privacy, but as I read out some of the messages, his anger turned to shame. Neil broke down. He admitted that he and Natalie had grown closer during the Chicago trip than he had let on. He swore that nothing physical had happened, but he confessed to enjoying her company and attention more than he should have. He said he had been feeling underappreciated at home and work, and Natalie's admiration had been flattering. He begged for forgiveness and promised to cut all non-essential contact with Natalie. He offered to look for a new job if that's what it took to save our marriage. Through tears, he reminded me of our history together, of the family we had built, and pleaded for another chance. I'm devastated. The trust I've been trying so hard to rebuild has been shattered completely. I feel like a fool for trying to work things out, for believing his earlier explanations. The Neil I thought I knew, the honest, devoted husband and father, seems like a stranger to me now. I've asked Neil to move out for now. He's staying with a friend while I figure out what to do next. The kids are confused and upset, which breaks my heart even more. Ethan asked me if Daddy did something bad, and I didn't know how to answer him. I'm considering my options now. Part of me wants to try to salvage our marriage for the sake of our children. I think about the good times we've had, the life we've built together, and I wonder if we can find our way back to that. Another part feels like this betrayal is too big to overcome. The lies, the emotional intimacy with another woman, the disregard for my feelings, it all feels like too much. I'm also angry at myself for not trusting my instincts from the beginning. I knew something was off, but I let Neil convince me I was overreacting. I let my desire to keep our family intact override my own feelings and intuition. I'd appreciate any advice on how to move forward. Should I consider marriage counseling, or is it time to talk to a divorce lawyer? How do I protect my children through this process? How do I start rebuilding my self-esteem and independence? I feel lost and broken, but I'm trying to stay strong for my kids. They need me now more than ever, and I can't let them down, no matter how much I'm hurting inside. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I wanted to share where things stand now. Thank you all for your continued support and advice during this challenging time. After much soul-searching and several conversations with Neil, I've decided to file for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but I realized that the trust between us has been irreparably damaged. The incident with Natalie was just the tip of the iceberg. It revealed deeper issues of respect and honesty in our relationship that I don't think we can overcome. In the weeks following Neil's confession, we tried to work things out. We attended a few couples counseling sessions, but it felt like we were just going through the motions. Neil seemed genuinely remorseful and made efforts to rebuild trust. He changed jobs to avoid working with Natalie, became more involved with the kids, and was more attentive to me. But every time he touched his phone, I felt anxious. Every time he was late coming home, I imagined the worst. I realized I couldn't live like that anymore. The final straw came when I discovered that Neil had been in contact with Natalie again. He claimed it was just to tie up loose ends at work, but the fact that he hadn't told me about it felt like another betrayal. It made me realize that no matter how hard we tried, the trust was gone. I've contacted a lawyer and started the divorce proceedings. Neil initially tried to convince me to reconsider, promising to do whatever it takes to save our marriage. He even offered to quit his job entirely to prove his commitment. But for me, it was too little, too late. The damage had been done, and I couldn't see a way to fully trust him again. The hardest part has been explaining the situation to our children. We've tried to be as gentle and honest as possible, assuring them that both of us still love them very much and that this change doesn't affect that love. They're struggling to understand, especially Ethan, who's old enough to know something serious is happening but too young to fully grasp it. Lily keeps asking when Daddy is coming home, which breaks my heart every time. Neil has moved out permanently, and we're working on a co-parenting arrangement. It's been challenging, but we're trying to keep things civil for the sake of the kids. I've also started individual therapy to help me process everything and build my self-esteem back up. On the work front, I found out that Natalie has been transferred to a different department. I don't know if this was Neil's doing or a company decision, but honestly, I'm past the point of caring about the details. I've been focusing on rebuilding my life as an individual. I've reconnected with old friends, started a new hobby, painting, something I've always wanted to try, and I'm even considering going back to school to advance my career in counseling. It's scary, but also exciting to rediscover myself outside of my role as a wife. There are still difficult days when I question my decision or miss the life we had. But then I remind myself of the betrayal and the lack of respect, and I know I've made the right choice for myself and ultimately for my children. I want them to see that it's important to stand up for yourself, and not accept being treated poorly, even by someone you love. I want to thank this community once again for your support throughout this ordeal. Your advice and encouragement have been invaluable. To anyone going through a similar situation, remember that you deserve respect and honesty in your relationship. Trust your instincts and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. This will be my final update. I'm looking forward to closing this chapter of my life and starting a new one. It won't be easy, but I'm hopeful for the future. Thank you all, and take care.